Okay, so the next thing we just kind of want to address is music workstations now and sequencers. This is a complex subject, so we're just going to kind of, overview this. You can just kind of take a look at it and talk about it a little bit. As we go on through this, we might address some of these issues in more detail. But basically the basic concept of a music workstation is that, if you just got a normal music workstation, it can be actual like a keyboard synthesizer that is got sequencers in it, connected to sound modules and things like that. And the actual workstation is going to work out MIDI information, and to what point, how many type of articulations and things like that can really depend, expression and all the things that it's able to do as far as being able to translate that to MIDI is really going to depend on the workstation that you get. So you really kind of got to look into that. But one of the cool things about it is that, okay, things like you've got workstations that you can connect with MIDI that are going to transfer MIDI information between each other. So, one of the biggest aspects to look at that is things like sound modules. The sound module itself isn't going to actually probably have any type of a keyboard or anything like that. But what it can do is it carries all that information and sounds just like your synthesizer or a sampler or anything like that can be triggered with MIDI in some type of configuration that they can be connected together to be triggered by initial MIDI information. And that is a cool thing. And sequencers that can actually reach out to it at certain points in time and trigger different sounds and tell it to do different things from sequencing different, configurations, almost like you've put together a symphony, and it's going to send MIDI information to that sound module to tell it it's time for it to play that string part, and here's the MIDI information to play it. That's already been set up, and you've already sculpted and done all the work you're doing to it. And so those are really cool, rack sound modules, and the other part about it is like sequencers. Well, sequencers can be very diverse. And the biggest thing about sequencers is that, like the piano roll editor, is that, it's taking certain information and MIDI information and putting it together, and playing at a certain time, a point in time, whatever sounds and MIDI information you've given it. So that whole subject can be very complex, but a basic understanding of it is like having different MIDI tracks in your DAW that are going to trigger at different times. And the sequencers can do that kind of stuff all on their own, basically the same way, and in sometimes a more complex way and sometimes a more simplified way, depending on what they're connected to and how many different types of sound modules are connected to your sequencer that you're working with, whether it's software or hardware. So, basically looking at that whole thing is that one of the biggest aspects of that is being able to put together different types of sequencers that are going to trigger or have sound modules connected to them, or that are going to be sequencers that are sound modules themselves, or samplers and synths that are actually built in, and or just having them set up to sequence different MIDI files that you have. And that might sound real simplistic, but the understanding of that is that you've got all these keyboards and all these sound modules and these different sequencers that are connected together all over the place in a very large production, that are going to get triggered by your sequencer and trigger different instruments and different sound modules to do different things, be getting MIDI information at certain times to do all kinds of cool things in a production. With different types of connectors, all these different, any of these instruments that can be MIDI capable or MIDI compatible that can be connected together to trigger all kinds of different sequences and MIDI information to create whole orchestras of sound, for all kinds of different applications. The applications are endless, for what you might want to use those for and what type of productions. But just as far as music, in a performance situation, that, all those different sequencers and connectors and synths and all those things sound modules and everything else connected together that are connected together in a certain way to go off at certain different times and do different things and reproduce MIDI information in their own unique way is the basic concept of that, which can be much more simplified into just a software sequencer that's going to, maybe you might be able to connect it in different ways to other standalone applications in a computer or in your DAW, and to do those type of things. But basically, that's a basic, look at what that's going to do. Some of those things can be very complex, and they are very complex because when you start getting into doing that stuff, some of the concepts that are involved with the channels, the sends, and then what the other how it's going to interpret it. Is it going to interpret that information? Are you going to be sending different MIDI information with sequencers to different places that are going to have different parameters or different formatting for that different sequencer or that different workstation that's going to apply, expression and, notes on, note off, and anything else that might be, incorporated into how that sound module or other workstation interprets that MIDI information and then plays it. Does that make sense? So that can be very complex, but, that's the basic concept of it. The actual music workstation is that's a very simple concept that I hope that you can, doesn't need to be explained too much, because basically it's, hopefully it's going to be doing those type of things internally or connected to other instruments or other sequencers, to do different things with the MIDI information that you have programmed inside of it, or that it has access to in other sequencers, that it may trigger a sequencer that's going to all of a sudden start some other program that's in turn going to trigger some other sequencer that's going to trigger some other, workstations or synthesizers or sound modules, and that whole thing can just go on forever. I mean, you can fill up a whole football field with that going on. And, that whole concept is really cool because it can just, you can start that whole thing with one note. You can start with that on a keyboard, and hit one note and off it goes, to create this entire thing that you've set up with all these sequencers and MIDI information and delays and, connections. And, that's an awesome thing it's mind boggling what all that might do. So that's just kind of a basic look at it, of what that concept is, of what that's going to do. And, you can scale that way down to, however small you want to see that, but understand that it's that concept, brought into smaller and smaller levels of functionality or workflow, depending on how you're going to use it and what application you're going to use it, or how complex you want the system to be. But it's very possible to do those kind of things, and the capability is there with the MIDI and the sequencers and all the things that are related to them that they can work with. So I hope I laid that out to her. That can be very complex. And when I've been reading around on it, I thought, well, this is going to be a 14-hour video. And I thought, okay, well, let's just talk about it a little bit so we can understand what the concept is of what that's able to do. And that it's scalable, does that make sense? And that's probably the biggest thing to understand, is that scalable down to, a sequencer that's going to be sequencing 2 different tracks and triggering different tracks and triggering different synths, or triggering different drum machines or drum tracks or things like that. And it's scalable to however big you want it to go or however complex. And that can be very different working in the DAW, or, working in, a big production that's, on a stage, or, in an arena, to where you're doing this light show and you've got all these things set up that, like you look like you just parked Star Trek, in the back lot, and with all your stuff to do this cool thing with the light show. And it can be very complex. So I thought that getting into the real logistics of that might be a little bit much, because you're really going to have to see that in your own mind, how far you might take that in a fairly large studio. You might take it a long ways. But a lot of times for the things that we're dealing with here in the studio and the audio engineering, that it's going to be probably scaled way back unless you're really into that kind of stuff, or you're doing live productions, and then you're going to really want to dig into that. But the field is so diverse, and there's so many things that you can do with it as far as connecting MIDI and having MIDI do things for you to trigger other different things, that it's very, very complex. So just the understanding that it's able to do that, so when you're working with the MIDI kind of stuff, that you understand that it's very possible a lot of those things can be connected. And if you are in the mindset that you're going to explore those things in your studio, that that they're there for you to explore, and it's going to take some reading to see how to do that. But as far as I can tell from what we understand about the basic concepts, you're going to be dealing a lot with just triggering and basic MIDI files that we've already talked about, the protocols, and we've talked about the formatting, and we've talked about different types of things that can be done and sent in, different information that can be sent on MIDI, and how that can differ with different workstations or different applications. And from that understanding, it shouldn't be that complex for you to figure out how you're going to do that and how you're going to connect that and what that other thing will do. But getting into that and going through what everything will do, it would be long video that I'm not planning on doing. So we just wanted to kind of take just a look at that. And as far as looking at the music workstations, that was the basic thing that we were talking about. That a modern workstation, that it can be kind of complex, because the problem is with when you're dealing with a sequencer and you're dealing with different types of sequencers, that those sequencers are going to do different things differently. But the basic thing to keep in mind is the MIDI information and what's possible to send it. And then you're looking at system exclusive things, that some sequencers are going to have more patches, different other sounds in it that are going to be system exclusive for different sound modules or different keyboards or different software. And just to keep that in mind, and you're going to take that as far as you want to, just the basic understanding what that is able to do, and how that they've really worked at being able to do that kind of stuff with MIDI information, so that you can really work out huge productions just by yourself, to where you can actually be a one-man band that's got just your guitar or your microphone, and you can set up a full production that sounds like the band just showed up, buddy, with an entire symphony, and do a full production with you just standing out there in the spotlight, and it can be done. I mean, it's going to take some work, but it's possible. And do it well, if you work at it the way we've talked about so far, with actually constructing that MIDI information to where it's a final product as best you can with the sound modules and things that you're connecting in the sequencers, that it's a huge thing, and it's really been taken to an extreme. So, it wouldn't hurt you if you're really going to expand into that, and you're really into that type of sequencing and interconnecting all that type of equipment for big things to happen in your studio, or things to happen there, that you're going to really need to read into that. But the other thing that we didn't really address is that information in the sequencers can be set up to automate and trigger different things in your studio, so that when you're doing things that you can have a fairly simple production set up that's going to trigger other things while you're recording. Now, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but it's possible to do that, and to trigger other kinds of instruments and other types of effects and all kinds of things to speed your workflow. But that would take some digging into. So anyway, we just kind of want to do an overview of that, and I hope I addressed like the workstations that we're getting into synthesizers, MIDI capable synthesizers, and what all they're able to do. And we weren't really trying to do a video on that or a series on that. We're just talking about how they can take that MIDI information and send it other places into all kind, and branch out like a tree all over the dang place. And it's very capable of doing that. So I hope I addressed that basically, and we just kind of took a peruse on that and kind of addressed it in a very general way so that it's very understood it can be done.